Hi crafters, it's Lou from CraftStash, and today I want to talk to you about 3D embossing folders. Now this embossing folder in particular comes with my new Textures Secret Garden collection, so I'm going to be focusing on this one, but all of the tips and tricks that I want to give you for using 3D embossing folders will cover absolutely any that you've already got at home as well, because they're a little bit different, they are built differently, so I think these tips and tricks are going to help you achieve the best possible results. So as I say, this brick wall folder comes in my new collection. You can see it in the base of this card just here, and you can see it on this one here. Now these are just small peeks, you'll see it in action in a moment, but it's absolutely beautiful, and it's the fact that it's 3D that really brings it to life. So I'm excited to show you how I emboss my cardstock or paper when I'm using these 3D embossing folders, because there are different techniques to using ordinary folders. So when you first pick up a 3D embossing folder, you'll notice the thickness. It is usually really thick and deep, and this does mean that when you bring in your die cutting machine to emboss, you're going to have to think about switching up the plates a little bit, but we'll get onto that in a moment. So when you open up your folder, you'll notice that there are more than just 2 layers to the folder. So we have the normal side with the raised part, and we have the side that has the indentation, so the lower part, but you also have kind of a middle ground. So when you look at the raised area, hopefully you'll be able to see on yours close up, you've actually got some parts that are higher up than others. They're not all level. This is what gives you that 3D effect. Okay, so what materials can you emboss with a 3D folder? You can go with paper, you can go with cardstock. My recommendation is a really strong cardstock. The heavier weight, the better the result that you are going to get. If you try embossing a thin paper in here, it's mostly going to tear and rip. So I've got craft cardstock, and I've got some sort of stamping cardstock, paper crafting cardstock that is over 250 GSM. 250 GSM is the minimum that you want to be using. Now, when I put this in my folder, I am going to be just spritzing with a little bit of water. What this water does, and it is just a light mist on both sides, is this is just going to absorb into the fibres and make the fibres of the paper much more flexible. So when we're putting it into our embossing folder and it's squeezing and shaping and manipulating those fibres, they move around a lot better, gives you a much deeper impression. Now onto our machine combination, or the plate combination in your die cutting machine. I'm focusing on the Sizzix Big Shot. Lots of crafters out there will have it. But the concept for whatever machine you have is going to be the same. Whatever plate sandwich you usually use, you're going to need to lighten that. You're going to probably need to take a shim away. Now in the Sizzix Big Shot, I tend to use my 2 clear plates with my embossing folder in between the 2 on the thick base plate. That's it. But that needs to be a little bit different now, because the embossing folder is 3D. It's much thicker. So instead of these 2, removing my thin plate and putting that on the base plate, that's too much. There's no way I'm going to get that through there. So I'm going to be replacing one of my clear plates with this thin shim instead. I like to put that on the bottom onto my thick base plate there. So I've got those 2, then my folder, and then 1 clear plate on top. This has just brought my sandwich down in pressure a little, enough for that slightly thicker embossing folder to go through. Now you will find there's an immense amount of pressure still with this. If you go a lot lighter, you're not going to get the sort of impression that you are hoping for with a 3D folder. So it's worth just noting you'll probably feel a bit more pressure than usual as you go through the machine with these types of folders. Now for the reveal. Look how deep and gorgeous that is. Isn't that absolutely stunning? I don't need to do anything more with that. It's got drop shadows and contrast in there because it's got such a deep impression. Now as I lift that away and look at the back as well, I could use that impression too. It's so pretty. Now you can see here I've got a little bit of darkness here. That's where I spritz the water. That will dry on its own absolutely perfectly, and the cardstock will hold its shape. When you look at the edge, you might notice that there's a little bit of tearing at the edges, so bear this in mind. This is that immense pressure that we were talking about, and this is why you want to use a really strong cardstock. This one's been okay, but if you do use anything much thinner, like I say, than 250 GSM, you're going to have that problem with this being stretched too much and cracking. Now I've got my deep emboss, I can go over with my blending brushes, and as you can see, I'm actually going to pick up more detail on some of these bricks than others, because some areas are more raised up than others. So it's not an even ground now. We've not just got two levels of the bottom or the deboss and the emboss, we've got two. Let's do this on the other side as well, so you can see you can definitely look at using both sides of your embossed image and see which you prefer. So with this, now we can also apply ink to our folder, but for me, this is not my preference. I prefer to add the ink afterwards because I've got these layers and I get this different contrast and deepness in the colour. But I'll show you what happens if you do add colour to your embossing folder by now embossing just some white cardstock. Okay, so you can see both sides. I'm going to apply my ink to my folder. You've probably seen this technique 100 times, but we've already discussed how there's not just one layer here. There's actually 2-3 different layers and the height of the design. This means that your ink is only going to be picked up by the highest areas, so not ideal. The same here. This side is probably mostly just the raised or the cement between the bricks, but we'll cover it anyway and we'll see how it comes out. This is an example for you so that you can see what happens when you ink a 3D folder and the difference between inking it before and after. So I'm going to run that through. Now, I haven't spritzed that with water. The only reason for this is because if I do spritz this with water, it's going to react with my ink because it's a water reactive ink, and I'll end up with a little bit of a mess in there, and ink is just going to be moving about where I don't want it. So I've left it dry this time. So now for the reveal. As you can see, we have mostly got our ink in the cement. That's absolutely fine, not a problem. But on this side, our ink hasn't settled into each one of the bricks. It's actually only settled into the bricks that were higher up. Now, this may be a look that you're going for. Absolutely great. But if you want to get a little bit of ink on each of your bricks, for example, with this folder, you're going to need to ink afterwards. So I hope these tips and tricks with a 3D embossing folder help you work out how best to use it and how not to use it and which materials to use with it too. If you like the look of this folder, check out the entire Secret Garden collection from Textures. It's just launched on CraftStash. You'll find the link down below for that. Hopefully I'll see you again soon on the CraftStash channel, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done already. Take care everybody and see you soon.